Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the book initiative that was begun in the pandemic to help authors, independent bookstores, and readers. And today we have something really incredibly great for writers as well as readers. It's writers that's going to change the way you write. Readers is going to change the way you read. We have Matt Bell, the author of Refuse to Be Done: How to Write and Rewrite a Novel in 3 Drafts. I recommend that all of you go to bookshop.org or walk over to your favorite indie bookstore and buy the book. If you have questions, and I know you will, put them in the chat and we'll ask them. Welcome, Matt. I'm so thrilled to have you here. This is just an
Oh, thank you.
this is an amazing book. So first I want to say that Matt Bell is also the author of Appleseed, which was a New York Times notable book, a wonderful book. Scrapper, a Michigan notable book. In the House, Upon the Dirt Between the Lake and the Woods, a finalist for the Young Lions Fiction Prize. He teaches creative writing to very lucky students at Arizona State University, and I want to tell you some of this advanced praise for his book. I can't imagine anyone setting pen to paper or fingertips to a keyboard who won't want to keep this book permanently close at hand. Benjamin Dreyer. That's why I have it right by my computer. Rebecca Mackay. I want this book in my student's hand yesterday. I'm grateful to hold it in mine today. That's why I am assigning this book to all my UCLA students from now on.
Mhm.
And there is rhapsodic praise from Alexander Chi, Dana Spiotta, Courtney Mom, and much more. So Refuse to Be Done: How to Write and Rewrite a Novel in 3 Drafts. The book is actually, what I wanted to know is when I first looked at this, when it said 3 drafts, I got scared because I thought it meant you write 1 draft, you're done, then you write it again, you're done, and then you write the 3rd and you're done. But that's not really what the book is. It's more
Right.
like sections. It's more like write a book in 3 sections. So so let's talk about the title first. Refuse to Be Done. What does that say about the exhaustion level of writers, first of all? And
Right.
second and second of all, why is putting this book into the 3 sections that you do, write, rewrite, and the final rewrite, so helpful for this?
Yeah, thanks so much, Karen. It's so nice to be here with you. I think I mean the title obviously is how to write and rewrite a novel in 3 stages that might be 6 to 9 drafts is not as pithy. And so that's
Right.
obviously right. It's just sort of this is just marketing. I
Thank
immediately
you.
take it back, right?
Thank you,
Um,
thank you. My
but
students were upset. They kept saying 3
yeah,
drafts because I was telling
right,
them, well, I do like 9,000 drafts. So I'm
right,
so
right, right,
glad
right.
about this. Okay.
So, yeah, so that's part of it, right? Of course,
Right.
and I think the book is very honest about that. Retracts it almost immediately.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
thank you for buying it. It's going to be more than 3 drafts. But I do think it felt useful to sort of break the process into like the kind of revision you do while you're drafting a novel, and the kind of revision you do at like the story level, and then the kind of the revision you do at like the prose level or the sort of preparing the book
Right.
for readers. Because it is pretty different. Like you can't worry about the same things at every draft of the book. There's so many things that if you worry about in the first draft, you will just be in your own way. And I think it's useful to sort of have some of that separated out in that way. You asked about the exhaustion level of writers. Yeah, it's hard, right? We were just talking about this before we started. It's such a challenging process. And I think, for me, the Refuse to Be Done is really about the moment when you go from like a good book that's sort of readable and maybe even publishable, and you're trying to get to like great book or like the best possible version of your book at least. And is something that happens when you stay in the extra couple months or whatever it is and do that
Right.
work. Yeah, yeah.
But I also think part of the genius of having it in these sections is that each section seemed very new to me. So I didn't feel
Oh, good.
overwhelmed as far as
Yeah.
revisions when I got this, because I thought, okay, all I have to do in this first revision, which of course is a lot, but it's still like not the
Right.
whole
Yeah.
scope of things, is this. And then when I'm done, I can move on to this next stage.
Right.
And it's actually very, very organic. And when you get to the last stage, the Refuse to Be Done, it felt to me like I had already done all the hard work, most of the really hard work. Now I was doing the grace notes
Mm.
and the layering and the things to make things really and truly brilliant. I
Right.
wanted to ask, um, when you were Whoops, I forgot my question. Okay, well, did you always write this way for yourself? Did you come to know what
Mm.
you know through trial and error? And are you always making new discoveries in your writing as you write?
Yeah. So I did not always write this way. Maybe like some parts of it, but I don't know what your experience was. But I finished I wrote two novels before I wrote my first published novel, and they were both like wrote and kind of right into a drawer. I sort of knew they weren't books that were going to be books. But when I finished the first draft of In the House, it was a book shaped object, right? It was 300 pages, but it was like kind of clearly not like a good novel. But I just had no idea how I was going to transform it. Like I
Right.
had revised short stories through like brute force. I just like tinkered with them till they were good. And then the novel that felt impossible to do with, it was too daunting. And so some of the things in this book, like the reverse outlining of the first draft to plan the second draft, came very organically out of like me trying to solve the problems of being a novelist, and then trying to learn about revision so I can make my practice better. But yeah, always making new discoveries. I mean, I think I write, as you know, I write a newsletter about sort of creative writing craft, and the one that's
Oh,
up this
right.
month, I
It's
feel like is
great.
an addendum to this book, right? It's like here's something I know better than I did when I wrote the book, even that you're always figuring it out and building on what you know. That seems like one of the reasons to keep writing, right?
Exactly. You wrote in the book that you try not to pass on your own lacks to
Yeah.
students. I am, of course, desperate to know what you think you are lacking in.
Oh, sure.
So I know that people listening would love to know too. So please tell us.
Yeah. Well, like an example would be that I never felt like I was a very good dialogue writer, right? And I actually felt like in some
Really?
ways I had built a style that was like yeah, for sure. So I almost felt like I
Wow.
was a dialogue avoidant stylist, right? Like I built like a narrative style where I didn't have to do very much. And then I would go to teach it, and I'd be like, I don't really know how dialogue works. I'm like, I like it in this Dennis Johnson story. You could do that, you know one of my
Oh
goals
no.
with that, like get better at dialogue. Like you've got to learn to do it so the characters can be in conversation with each other. And so I think I have learned to be better about it. But so that'd be an example. But you find it all the time. You can't explain something to students that they want to know, and you're like,
Right.
oh, this must be something I don't know very well. Like, I mean, even novel structure, it took a long time to get to where I could teach that, which is different than doing it.
That's right. It's totally different than doing
Mm.
it. Oh, I want to know. You also said there was no right or wrong way to use the book, which I really loved because I keep leafing through it. So first, I want to know if you could talk a little bit more about that, and also if you could explain to people listening what's reverse outlining, and
Mm.
why did you have this in three sections?
Yeah.
How did that come
Yeah,
about?
as far as there being sure. As far as there being no right or wrong way, I think I write kind of like idiosyncratic weird books. Like it feels really clear to me that the goal of teaching should not be to make people write books like I write. Like I just don't have this like there's one way novels should be and I will teach it
Right.
to you. That just even in my own process, I want to write a lot of different kinds of books. So that seems really obvious to me. As far as reverse outlining, what I do when I write a first draft, which I usually write without an outline, without much of a plan, is when I'm done, I map the first draft into an outline, usually by trying to write down the beats of action, the sort of events that occur in the time narrated of the main storyline of the book. That means like not backstory, not interiority, not digressions or sort of essayistic parts of the book, but like just the
Mhm.
action. And the idea of that is to make like a scale model of the book that I can then tinker with and improve as a plan to write the second draft. Because otherwise, I just didn't have an analytic tool for looking at a first draft and saying like, how could this be better shaped? It was too hard to do it with 300 pages of prose. Like I had to
Right,
make it a
right.
smaller object. Yeah. I don't know about you. I don't know if you outline or if there's a part of your process where you do
I
that
sort
kind
of
of
like
analyzing.
I was really surprised and actually really grateful that a lot of the stuff in this book whoops, put it up. I already do.
Right.
I start out with an outline and then as I'm writing, it gets ripped up and tossed away. And I actually do outline after I'm done with my first draft because I
Yeah.
find it really helpful because then you see the beats and what's going on and what
Hmm.
isn't. Um, I wanted to ask you, what do you think of programs like NaNoWriMo or Write a Novel in
Sure.
45 Days?
Yeah, I wrote a NaNoWriMo novel in 2006 or something, right? And
Yeah,
that
but
was
you
the
know how to
first.
do it. You know how to do
But I
it. What
didn't
about
then.
people?
That was,
Oh, you
yeah,
didn't
that
then.
was.
Okay.
I mean, it was one of my drawer novels, right? Like I wrote like a six, but I learned I could write 60,000 words in a month. That felt valuable,
Oh,
or even that
that's
I could make
right.
something that big. Um, the difference between when you've written 90% of a novel but never finished one, and the first time you hit the end of something that big, I think that's a game changer, right? Just to give
Right.
yourself the
That's right.
experience of going beginning, middle, and end teaches you that you can do it. Um, in the novel writing classes I teach, it feels very different to students who have written a manuscript before and ones who are
Right.
like even on page they're on like page 50 and it's the longest thing they've ever written. Like it changes how you approach it.
You also
But do I think you're gonna
I'm
have a
sorry.
finished novel at the end of that? No, sorry. But
No,
like you're
no,
clearly not gonna have a
right.
finished novel at the end of that, right? No one should go into it thinking that. But I also
Right.
think there's a lot of like people who just want the experience of writing that much. They're not necessarily trying to be a
Right.
published novelist who are doing NaNoWriMo.
Right,
It seems
right. I
fun.
think, yeah, I think that anything that gets you writing is a good thing. You also said
Yeah.
something that I loved, where you're supposed to tell yourself that you're writing a novel every
Yeah.
day because it helps insecurity and anxiety and crushing doubt. And I think it's important for writers to know that those are our companions.
Right.
They're especially crushing doubt is with
Yeah.
us every day. It's what I tell my students to always tell themselves, I'm a writer. That because there are some people who feel that you're not allowed to call yourself a writer unless you've published something. And I think, no,
Right.
that's not
No.
true.
Agreed.
So, I mean, Todd Goldberg raved about this book because he said it wasn't just about how to write, it's about how to be a writer, how to look at things
Mm.
differently, how to persevere. I'd love for you to tell us about your own life as a writer, how it started and how it's changed, and how you got to the point where you feel now, I'm really a writer. Or do you?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I think a lot about my friend Bonnie Nasdem wrote an essay where she talked about like thinking of yourself through verbs rather than nouns. Like the nouns are hard to claim or be sure of. Am I a writer? Am I an author? Like, and what happens when you're not
Right,
writing? You have a year where a book falls apart or something. But like I am writing is something that's very easy to claim. Like, 'cause you're either doing it or you're not, right? And so I like thinking about that way. The students in our classes are writing, and they don't have to worry about the identity part of it, which will always be in flux and be weird. I
right,
started writing seriously when I was 20 or 21. I'd written some when I was younger, but just in a like really, I think it was part of my reading practice, right? I was like, I liked I was just making things like the things I liked. It was a way of being a reader. And then I started really writing in my 20s. And I think, your relationship to it changes over time or why you're doing
right.
things. There's the moving bar of publication. You publish a story and then you're like, well, maybe I should publish a story in a great magazine. Then you get a great
Right.
magazine. You're like, maybe I should write a book. And and that part is like, it's just going to keep happening. But I think in the last couple of years, I've really got back in touch with like my own sort of like core joy about writing, and the publishing part of it and the public part of it feels very, very separate for me now from like my actual practice as a writer, which is days I write
Healthy.
and read well, I feel more like myself than I do other days. Right. When I don't
Right.
write, I feel thin, like as a person. Yeah, I want to be writing. That's the thing I want. The other stuff is
Yeah.
extra. And yeah,
I feel exactly the same way. If I don't write, I feel like I'm slowly going insane.
uh-huh,
And also the whole
yeah,
thing with publishing, it doesn't always feed you the way you think it's going to feed
no,
you. I have a friend who he's a musician, and he won an Academy Award for writing music.
right,
And he got up on the stage, accepted the award, and then the next day one of his friends called him up and said, "So, now do you feel successful?" And he said,
right,
that lasted about like 5 seconds. And then I was
yep,
back to self doubt and I just wanted to get back to my music. So, I
yep,
mean, I think like you're absolutely right. Publishing is totally separate from writing. The rewards are
yeah,
totally different. And sometimes there are no
hmm,
rewards in publishing. So you better find
right.
it in the writing.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think that's so important. And when it's not to make the goals of publishing books like lesser, not to be thankful for the things that have happened for my
No,
books. Because I'm having a nice career, you're having a nice career, but like that's not really the part that like you said,
That's
feeds me.
not
Not at all, really. Yeah.
no, it's not. It's not. And a career is not definitely like this way. It can go
Oof,
up and
God, no.
down and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us about steering towards the rapids. I loved when you talked
Oh,
about that in your
yeah.
book.
Yeah, and this is from George Saunders. It's a story or an anecdote he tells in an interview that's at Bomb. If people want to look up George Saunders and Bomb, they'll find it there. And he talks about like your job as a novelist being to steer your characters into the rapids as opposed to like trying to protect them from harm. And so you have to put your characters in places where they get into trouble and things happen. Charles Baxter has a great book about like the art of the scene, and he talks about like like being taught as a kid, of course, like not to make a scene, right, not to say things that will upset people, not
Right.
to, and like
Right.
it right. And of course what you do as a novelist is like have characters say the thing they're not supposed to say, have them do the thing they really want that the world was telling them they can't want, and all those things make scenes. And I it's so literal and like really really useful. My drafts are full of characters saying like I almost said, or I wished I'd said, or I'm like, no, 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 we're gonna go back and you're gonna
Go
say
and
that. We're
do
gonna
it.
see
You
what
say,
happens. Let's
yes,
make a mess. Yeah. That's
that
steering
is
into the rapids.
that is so helpful. There's so many things that were so helpful. You also talk about discovering the book by writing the book, about not being too
Yeah.
sure of what the book is about. I would love you to talk about that too, because that's
Sure.
always the case. I may think that I know exactly what's going to happen to the book from the beginning to the end, but I absolutely don't. And there's always that surprise at the end of, oh, that's what I wanted to write about.
Right. I'm teaching this generative novel writing class right now where students start at 0 and write together, right? And we're 10 weeks in, and so students are getting into this phase where like, is this the book I was trying to write? What's happening now? And the books are like becoming their own thing, and they're struggling with the turn in some ways. And we've been talking a lot about Richard Hugo's essay, The Triggering Town, which is about poetry, but it talks about like there's the triggering subject of a poem, like this is the reason you started to write, and at some point a poem makes a turn or wants to make a turn toward its true subject. And I feel that in novels, right? Like if
The
you
true
try to
subject.
stay with your triggering subject, the book fails or is miserable to write. And there's that thing where a book wants to become something and you have to go with it, and your conception of the book is in the way of that happening more often than not.
Yep, that's exactly
Yep.
right. I want to talk about another great thing you said, which was you advise people to read your work predictively. How are
Hmm.
expectations thwarted or fulfilled? I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I was trying to think when I first started teaching novel writing of how to, we're only going to write like half of a novel or a third of a novel in my classes just for the length of them. So to do that is to,
Uh-oh, we're having a little
oh, we're
technical
back, maybe.
difficulty. Oh, we're
Yes.
back. We're back.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I flipped out for a minute. Yes.
Okay.
What was the last thing you heard?
Um, I don't know. I don't remember.
Well, I'll
It
just
was
back up a minute. So
sorry. I
we're
was just
talking
like
about
trying
reading
to get
predictively. Yes,
right.
absolutely.
Yes.
And so the goal with reading predictively is just to look at your material to find your material, as Lucy Corn says. And I think what I'm trying to do is look at my own draft and see like what seems like it wants to go forward, or what seems like future trouble, or when a character expresses resistance to something, then that's a future scene. Or this book seems like it wants to be about the relationship between these two brothers, so how can I build that in future scenes? And sort of practicing that when I read published books, and just really stopping at like the third end of act one and being like, what's set up by act one that I expect to see in act two, and then seeing what actually happens when I'm reading. And that seems to really help build my novelist muscle, by paying attention in a really explicit way to how things pay off in other people's books.
What happens if, say, you've done the first section already and you're in your second section, and all of a sudden you realize you have to make a major plot change? Do you
Yeah.
need to go back to the beginning again?
I think there's two approaches, right? One is to go back to the
Okay.
beginning, and I think the other is to go forward as if you've already made the change, which I find
Oh, that's a good idea.
oh,
That's a really good
yeah.
idea.
It's both like difficult, but in your mind you just act as if you've already done those rewrites, and then you go forward I talk in the book, I think, about a
Right.
student of mine I had who had a brother and a father character. And at some point, she decided they were really one character. They were serving the same function. And she had like 200 pages of draft. But rather than go back, she just moved forward with only the son in the book. So the book had like a I don't know, schizophrenia or something for a little bit, where it had two minds about itself. But in the stuff she was writing, she only really responsible for the world in which there had only been one character the whole time. And I think that was really smart. I learned so much from watching her do that, and I'll never
Yeah.
sort of forget that. Yeah,
That's incredible. I want to ask about the next step when a publisher and an editor step in. Did
yeah.
once you put Appleseed in there and you were working with your editor, did you find that the book changed even more significantly? Is this always to be expected?
Yeah, I mean, it can obviously change in a lot of different ways. I think in this
Yeah.
book, there was some like big picture stuff that we did to Appleseed. I think one of the things that really worked out well was there was a storyline that my editor was more interested in than I was, and I felt like her attention really like brought it to life, right? It was
Wow.
something that was
Okay.
like it was in the book kind of as a justification for something, and she found it really vital, and so the volume on that got turned up in a way that really helped. Certainly got sped up a little bit, right? I think my first beginnings are always a little slow, and sort of seeing how to, having someone else help me compress that introductory material is always good. And then my editor, Catherine Ninsel at Mariner, is a fantastic line editor, and her, attention to my language was really appreciated and smart, and did, just make the book a better read than it would have been otherwise. But it's actually about the same for size for this one as it got submitted. It's maybe like 5,000 words shorter or something. Like it's proportionally more itself than maybe my other novels have been, which is
Okay.
nice. But I love the editorial process. I'm so happy to have a smart,
I do
interested
too.
person in there with me. Like I wouldn't give that up for anything. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's kind of
it's
the
really
best.
easy. Yeah, it's easy to look at somebody else's work and see like, well, maybe you should do this or this. But after a
Absolutely.
while, you
Yeah.
cannot tell with your own work. You just can't. So what about
No.
showing work to friends? Do you have readers that you show your work to, and at what stage?
Very late for me. So, like, of the 3 drafts that are in this book, I usually show people after all of that is done. Partly believing that your friends will not read your book over and over and over again. Like mostly. Maybe you have better friends than I do, I wouldn't ask my friends to in some ways. But so like for Appleseed, I sent it to another novelist and my agent at the same time. So my first 2 readers were a friend and my agent. I do have friends that I talk to about the book while I'm writing it, but I don't
Mhm.
show them things. And for in the last couple of years, they haven't been other writers. So I have friends who are academics or critics or philosophers in different ways. So I spend a lot of time kicking around the ideas of a book, but I very rarely show people pages until I am like done, done, done. So for Appleseed, it was 3.5 years before I showed a word of it to anyone else,
I think that's
which is
smart. I
extreme.
think that's the best thing to do. You one thing that I read in your book that really jazzed me because I do this. You talked about retyping everything in stage two,
Oh
which I
yeah,
think is really crucial, or to put
yeah,
it in a new font to trick your brain into
right,
seeing something fresh. I
yeah,
tell my students like put it in a color. It's this
yeah.
amazing thing but it really unlocks a new way of looking at things. So I wanted to know,
Yeah.
how did you discover this? Was this
I
just by
think
accident or
I think it was part of that discovering the reverse outline thing with my first novel. It's like after I
okay,
made that outline, it was not possible to tinker the first draft toward that outline, right? The only way to get it to that new version was to rewrite it. And the rewriting has been so successful that I do it for everything. I wouldn't trust myself to not do it, right? Like I mean,
right, right, exactly.
the gains are so high.
Do you read it out loud also?
Oh, constantly. Yeah, yeah. I'm
Always,
always
yeah.
reading aloud.
Isn't
Yeah,
that
yeah.
amazing? I never did that before, and my writer friends kept
Yeah.
saying, "Do it, do it. What's the matter with you?"
Right.
And I started doing it, and it puts you in a zone, right?
Yeah,
It's like a
yeah.
totally
And
different
it
state
in
of being.
it involves your body, right, in a nice
Yes.
way that I think is really important. And I think like for your work to be bodily impactful is
Yeah, and
a
you're
re
doing the hand motions too
yeah,
while
yeah, yeah.
you're
Oh
reading out
God,
loud.
yeah. Yeah. You'd have to tie my hands down to keep me from moving. But I think so too. I also think the mode of screens is skimming. Like, like the way we skim the internet on our phone or the way we scroll
Right.
on a thing, and the mode of working on paper or reading aloud is impossible to skim, right? You have to literally say the words. And I think that
Okay.
those are always around the way we just like thumb through our phones through a. You can't do that with your novel. You're not going to improve it by skimming it, you know?
Right. I have a question for you. This is a question personal to me, which
Sure.
is I figured out backstory for a straight linear novel. But what if you're
Hmm.
writing a dual timeline?
Yeah.
Yes. So you have two time periods. Say you have the 1920s and today, and you're interspersing those two time periods.
Right.
How do you find the connective tissue between the two of them?
Yeah.
Like when you stop that chapter in 1920, just as I don't know, a character is about to steal something, and the next chapter is going to pick up the story today.
Right.
How do you need connective tissue for that? Like, do you have to start the today chapter with something like John had never stolen anything before, but as he walked into
Right, right,
Starbucks,
right. You have to do it that like, yeah, the handoff, right?
yeah,
Is how I used to
yeah,
think
the
of that.
handoff. That's right,
Um,
handoff. Do
yeah.
you?
Yeah, I don't know that you have to, right? Eventually you have to bring
Right.
it all together, right?
Yeah.
Appleseed has three timelines, and I
Right.
initially wrote them in that second draft plan phase. I had them all planned out, and I rewrote them in just like 30-page chunks, which I knew was not the chapters,
Okay.
and by just like getting me through the book. And then when I got done, I edited each timeline as its own book. They were like 60,000 words, and like 40,000 words. And so I made them work completely independently. And then
That's genius. That's such a good
it was so,
idea.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
wild, right? And then I like rewove them trying to find the real
Mhm.
chaptering. And as I read them, you do find those opportunities. Like this is like the best place to cut out, or this is the place where like a theme will carry over across the timelines, even though the action doesn't carry over, or a place where you can like a
The
person
theme.
goes into a place and a person comes out, or the things. I have this book.
That's so
Grab it.
interesting.
This is nice and go being home. I know. It's called Cinematic Storytelling by
Oh my God, I'm gonna order it. Cinematic
Jennifer Van.
storytelling.
I don't know how to say her last name. Sijll. But it's partly film conventions, most of which are cuts between shots, right? And I
Okay.
think like
Right.
it's a
Right.
weirdly useful. I think about it when I go look at transitions, right? I'm like, looking for some of those kind of
Right.
things to be
Right.
really great. And then I
That's
think one of the best. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, no. You go ahead. You go ahead. One of the best what?
I was just going to say one of the best transitions I think is thinking about like just tonal shifts. But when you shift, like
Tonal
a
shifts.
happy thing goes to a sad thing, a gross
Sure.
thing goes to a sweet thing. There are so many transitions in movies where a violent thing happens and it switches to someone eating. We go from like the body to food, and you see that over and
Right.
over. These sort of like, and you go,
Right.
oh, right, but you're interested again. And sort of just paying attention to the way like associative connections in your brain. Like these two things will mirror each other in some way because your brain has associations.
Can people hire you?
Sure. Yeah.
Me, when I'm done with the draft.
Right. I mean,
Okay.
it's so funny how easy it is to see some of those opportunities in someone else's work, right? Where like these two things go together. But I think a lot of it is just variation.
Right.
Sentence and paragraph variation is style, and making tonal shifts is story. I really think
Yeah,
90% of the
it,
time.
it's interesting because the first time I learned about, and the first thing I learned about story structure at all was one of my students gave me John Truby's books, The
Yeah.
Anatomy of Story Structure, which is
Hmm.
very dense and very big, but there were like things in there that were so brilliant that I thought, "Oh, I have to stop John Truby and get to know him
Right.
so I can talk to him about all this stuff," which I did successfully. And,
That's
and
great.
um, he admits that like movie stuff can help novel stuff. Not all of it works. Like he has a series
Right.
of 22 steps, which I don't think work, but his 7 steps
Yeah.
I think are absolute genius because
Mm.
people are used to movies now. Okay, I have
Yep.
one other question, and then we're going to go take questions
Great.
from the audience. You were a restaurant manager, so I have to ask you what that job taught you about writing and managing something different than
Mm.
words, which is food.
I think the thing it taught me about writing is that it taught me how to have a writing practice. Like I worked a lot of hours, and my first like steady writing practice, I would get my managing schedule a month at a time, and I would schedule 5 2-hour blocks around my restaurant life, and I just put them on my work schedule and treated them like they were my job, and that got a lot of work done. I also think like I was a really like shy, kind of withdrawn kid, and working in a
Really?
restaurant. Yeah, right. I know. God, now you can't shut me up. But I think writing or working in restaurants, which was so personality based, really taught me how to interact with really anyone and be interested in other people and to pay attention to them. And I think without that, I would be a really different writer because it did make me a person who could talk to just about anything, about anything. And I'm really grateful for that 10 years of practice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You're actually the second writer today who I
Hmm.
spoke with who told me how shy she was growing up and
Right.
how antisocial. And I certainly was the shyest person around the block. But it's sort of
Yeah.
like once you have to get out there and have a
Hmm.
job or
Yeah.
speak to people on book tour, you pretend at first, or at least I did, and then you become
Right.
sort of
Yeah.
out there, out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Ollie, do we have any questions? Sometimes people are shy. Oh, great. Here we go.
Oh,
What
yeah.
do you do with ideas that simply can't be translated into novels?
Mm.
Oh, are all ideas workable? When is it better to throw something out?
Oh yeah, those
Great
are three really
question.
different questions.
Yeah.
um, I think usually for me, when a novel idea isn't working, it's because nothing else ever joined it. That like when I hit page 100, I'm still in the original idea somehow. Like nothing else has come with it. It's maybe Einstein who said something about like problems are very rarely solved on like the plane of their conception. Like there's sort of like the thing has to go somewhere else. That's where you get the sort of leap. I have a lot of 100-page novel drafts that just didn't become books. Between In the House and Scrapper, I wrote 200-page drafts that didn't become books. Between Scrapper and Appleseed, I wrote 4. I think that by the laws of math, I now have to write 8 failed novels before I can finish another book. So it's totally okay to have problems that don't work. When do I abandon something? I mean, some of it is that if I get to 100 pages and the energy's out and nothing's come along, that's a reason to go. It's just that one ran its course. I had one novel that I wrote on for about a year and wrote about 150 pages. And I realized as I was writing and I was doing the research that I just wasn't the right person to write the book. I was getting out of my cultural depth. And like the more I sort of researched, the more clear it was maybe that I was never going to really be able to do it well. And so I abandoned that book. But I think about the work and the thinking I did in that book all the time. I think it's really like formative for me as a person. And that's again going back to that like the writing itself was really good for me, even though that didn't become a novel. And I'm really grateful for the time I spent on that failed book. And hopefully, as you leave a book, you eventually find a way to like feel that way about it. Maybe not right away though. Yeah.
It's so interesting that you were talking about that with the energy and the feeling, because one book
Yeah.
I wish I had abandoned, it was my third novel with a new publisher, and they really wanted me to write something outside my comfort zone. They wanted a really commercial
Mm,
novel, and they wanted me to outline it first. First outline I wrote, they said, okay, this is it.
yeah.
My heart was never in it. It was sort of like
Right.
slogging to try to finish it. They published the book.
Yeah.
It got only 2 reviews, the worst reviews I ever got in my life. I
Oh,
mean,
right.
really
Of course.
nasty,
Yeah. Wasn't a book you were
nasty,
supposed to be
horrible.
writing. Yeah.
But but I actually reread that book, about a year ago,
Oh
and I
man.
realized those reviews were right. You know, they
Yeah.
were actually right. Because you should never write something that you don't care about
Yeah.
passionately,
Yeah.
and so for me, it was the same thing. It was not a waste of time because I learned something valuable. If I'm not in
Yep.
love with the book, nobody else is gonna be.
No, God, no. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yep. I think
yeah,
that's really important. It
yeah,
does show. It is, and also if you write 10 books, like they're not all gonna be again, the quality is also not going to
yeah.
be exponential. It's just not. We can write a decent book or a flawed book. I mean, like if we have a long
Yeah,
enough
you're
careers, we're gonna
allowed to
write our
do that.
stinkers. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're allowed to do that. I think Jonathan Evison told me that he buried 10 novels.
Oh, I believe that
He
about
wrote,
that guy too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he just sort of like gave them up, and you have to be willing to think, okay.
Yep.
Sometimes too, I have another novel I did give up that just wasn't. Again, it was like with an editor who wanted me to write a certain way without a
Mm-hmm.
plan, and so the novel was
Mm-hmm.
800 pages, and I had no idea what it was about. But I was
Right.
able to bastardize parts of it that I loved and put
Yeah.
into other novels. You can do that too. Do we have any other questions, Ollie? Do you go back and read the
Hmm.
novels you scrapped? Did you learn from them, or are they sorry
Sorry,
reminders?
reminders. I don't think they're sorry reminders. I have one novel that I think I lost because I got in my head about the publishing end of it. And I said, is this the right novel? Rewriting? Am I doing the right thing? And I think I sort of killed it for myself. I feel bad about that book because I lost that book for no reason but my own mental failings, right? I worked on a novel for like 2 years about Alan Turing and also about the making of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, like the Disney movie. Those two things together, weirdly. And the novel didn't work out, but I went back. Someone reminded me of something from the book, and I found a 2-page standalone piece in that book that became a short story in Fairy Tale Review 6 years later. So I did 2 years of work and went back to my manuscript and found 2 pages that could be published like with no edits. I mean, they're just ready to go. And I was like, is the rest of this book good? Did I quit wrongly? And no, it's not, right? It was just like it's just like, no, that probably was a book I should step away from. But it's sort of but there's just always something else to write. I mean, I feel like I feel less and less precious about the things I throw away. And I would say even to write one novel, like I often write at least double the words that are in the book because I throw away so much, right?
Because you're going to tighten it up.
Yeah, and you write things that you are for you to figure out the book that are scaffold. They're not real parts of the book. So I think for Appleseed, I threw away about 150,000 words, and the book is 125, right? So yeah, it's kind of wild how much material you will end up making.
Yeah, because you don't need everything. Yeah, I tend to write like pages and pages about someone's childhood, and then I realize they're 40 years old now. We don't really need to know about their birthday party or whatever else.
But you needed to know it, right? You're learning it for you. I needed to know
it. Yes, like exactly. That's the difference. You need to know it. Mm-hmm. Any other last questions, Ollie? Okay. So I have one last question, which I always ask is, what's obsessing you now and why?
What's obsessing me now and why? Well, I my last novel is about about climate change, and I think the work I'm doing now is I'm still reading and thinking about the ecological and about utopias and dystopias, and continuing to think along those lines. I also was thinking in the last novel about climate refugees, or something I got sort of interested in reading that book, and I think the work I'm doing now is still thinking along those sort of lines, and certainly that's on my mind in the news right now in other ways. So those are the sort of maybe like big work obsessions. And then like in my personal life, I'm obsessed with a video game that came out that I'm playing a lot of, and happily.
Which one? Which game is it?
It's called Elden Ring. It's like a fantasy role playing game. Yeah, and I'm playing like a gross amount of that instead of writing my novel, so it's fine.
I have to tell you, when years ago when Doom came out, I would play it until like 4 in the morning.
Nice.
Every night. I mean, those things are dangerous. I love those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stay away.
I really.
What?
No, go ahead.
I just was going to ask you, what question didn't I ask that I should have asked you?
Oh, I never can answer that question. I'm so bad at that, right?
Oh, okay.
This all seems great. It's such a pleasure to get to hang out.
So you can ask me, why did you ask me that question that I don't
know?
This has been so much fun. I want to show the book again. And seriously, people, this is the best book on writing that I've read. Ever. I'm absolutely serious. It was so helpful to me. And it seemed to come at exactly the right time for me. It's practical, it's real. It tells you so much about what it means to be a writer and how to lead your writing life. Please go to bookshop.org if you need to find a great indie bookstore, or just walk over to your favorite indie bookstore. Also, while you're there, you might as well buy all of Matt Bell's other books as well, so you can see how what he's teaching translates to the book. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you all for coming here, for asking questions. This will be on our YouTube station at A Mighty Blaze Forever, so you can rewatch it and rewatch it and rewatch it. And we'll see you next time. So thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.